Well, happy Veterans Day, everyone. Thank you again very much for joining the Atlanta Council for its celebration of Veterans Day 2020. The film we've just seen and its introduction by Adrian Arsht and General David Petraeus just could not have been better. On behalf of the Atlanta Council, am terrifically proud of the work. It certainly succeeds right on the mission that we at the Atlanta Council had for it. But that's not all. We're now going to have a panel discussion that I've been looking forward to, frankly, as much as being able to see the film, with the playwright, Michelle Colas-Brooks, with the film's director, Seema Sueko, and with Nate Grazer. Nate is the real-life Nate from who's depicted in the film, the Army chaplain, who's depicted in the film. And very pleased to have all three of you here at the Atlanta Council, virtually anyway, to have a further discussion about this work and about the mission of the work. As the three of you know, I'll tell the audience, we want to spend about 40 minutes here just to put a capstone on what you've seen, with a discussion that reveals to you, gives all of you some context for how this work came together. Each of Michelle and Seema and Nate have a story to tell about that. Talk a little about the film itself, and the choices that the artists made about it, and the impact that Nate can testify to us that it has, at least on him, and maybe by extension other veterans. And then a conversation, as importantly, about where this work goes. How can from the Atlanta Council's point of view, the mission of this work keep going next year, and from the artistic point of view, what are the vectors off of which this work will extend into greater things for each of you individually and all of us collectively into the future. So those three topics, we'll talk about those over the next 40 minutes. And then we will draw this Atlanta Council celebration of Veterans Day 2020 to a close. Part of the Atlanta Council where I work, and which is principally responsible for the creation of this film, Veterans Day 2020, is the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. The director of the Scowcroft Center is Barry Pavel, and he, among the things that the techniques or the innovations that Barry is insisting upon to try to prosecute the mission of the Scowcroft Center is the use of arts and creativity, the conjunction of arts and creativity with more traditional, stuffy, at least by their outside reputation, experts and professionals in national security, to see if we can't uncrack some of the perennial problems of national security, and to coin a phrase, to think different about these problems. Artists, I have found, have helped us do that, and that brings me to the starting point of, from my point of view, how this project got going. In the course of that work, I got to know Michelle Colas-Brooks. And to cut a story that I shouldn't make long short, she and I were having lunch one day out in Los Angeles when she started to tell me about a project that she was toying with, or at least thinking about creating. And I'm going to ask Michelle to explain that moment to us, and maybe come back later in this conversation to explain how this more directly relates to an Atlanta Council mission that I happen to have in my pocket and couldn't figure out what to do with. So Michelle, pick it up from lunch at the Superba on Lincoln Avenue in Venice, California.
Yes, so we talked about theater a little bit, and you know, what happened was that I had absolutely no connection to the military at all. I live in a world where I know a lot of artists, I know a lot of terrific people, but I literally do not know one person in any of my worlds who served in the military. And my husband, who has a great interest in the military, would talk to some people.
The novelist Max Brooks, it must be said.
Okay, yes, him. He would come home and he would talk to me about some military stuff. And to me, there was, there's weapons, there's, stuff that doesn't particularly interest me. But
right.
Then he started telling me some stories of some of the people that he had met. And every one of them was surprising to me. And I remember saying to him, somebody ought to interview these people and get their stories to humanize them, because these are all surprising to me. And then I realized, oh, that's what I do. maybe I'm the one that should
You
go
were
out.
a journalist before you were a playwright.
Yes, I left as journalist before I sort of moved over into playwriting. And so when I was fortunate to have lunch with Steve at Superba, I sort of threw this idea out at him to see if it would stick. And what I had in mind was kind of using the paradigm of what Eve Ensler did with the vagina monologues, which was to take stories, to work with those stories, to curate them, and then to have actors, talented actors, deliver them for maximum effect.
Right. So I'm going to interject because there will be a lot of people in the audience who don't know the Vagina Monologues. The Vagina Monologues is a play by Eve Ensler, which, like the play on which this film is based, was curated from interviews with, in her case, in Eve Ensler's case, women. I just wanted to add that bit of context for an audience that might not recognize the reference.
Yes. And talking very much about women who had been in violent situations, among other things. Right. So anyway, Steve said, I think this is a good idea. I think it's something that you should think about. And so I just started making phone calls to anybody I knew who knew anybody in the military. Then I started work, and it was by far the most gratifying work I've ever done. And I really didn't know if anybody was going to talk to me, because I don't know anything about the military. But I found when I went in and said, hey, I don't know anything about the military. You have a lot of acronyms. You have a lot of stuff that I don't understand. But I think if you can translate your stories and your feelings about the military, if you can tell them to me, who doesn't know them and who doesn't understand anything about the military, then maybe I can be your translator and tell your stories to people like me who've never had any association with anybody in the military. Because we're all, which I've understood on some level, but I didn't really understand until I started talking to people, is that we're all responsible for the people that go out and fight for us, right? Yeah. And so if you don't know them, if I don't know them, it's harder for me to care about them. And so
by extension, although it wasn't really your aim, but by extension, you don't care about what America's doing in the world more generally, beyond its use of the military. Is the way you came to meet and interview Nate illustrative of the way you did most of these interviews?
Yeah, I mean, it was just tossing it out there. Somebody else that I interviewed knew Nate and said, you really ought to talk to Nate. Nate's a good guy to talk to. And I just called him cold like anyone else, and we started talking, and we have not stopped talking, I think, for a couple of years now.
What was that? You must remember that moment, of the succession of moments, Nate. What were your expectations of this Venice, California-based playwright giving you a call to tell stories?
Yeah, it's not every day that somebody calls and actually wants to hear about your military service. I mean, it's really, Steve, you can probably count on one hand the amount of people who have actually asked you. Yeah, so I was curious, and she was, I also was really, one of the things that's wonderful about Michelle is that she's just very curious, and she approached it like, I know nothing, tell me all about it. Wait, hold on, so wait, now what happened? No, I'm sorry, I don't know. What is that word you just used? What's a sergeant or a NCO? Can you say that again? Hold on. What was that? And you could tell she's like taking notes on the phone, right?
Yeah.
Like, what was that word you used again?
Sure.
And there's something that's very endearing and disarming about that. Like vets are typically pretty suspect, and so someone's.
But I think you were susceptible to the conversation because you knew that there were stories that needed to be told, or that there was something America didn't understand. Do I have that right?
I don't think I was that enlightened yet. I think
okay.
I think a friend of mine.
I got to tell you what, this character she wrote based on you is.
Yeah, I think like anything, I think I grew with Michelle in this too. I think that's a really important part. I think it's not one-sided. I think both of us have grown together in this, and I think that's an important part. That it's not just better for everyone, and maybe we'll talk about that later, but it's also good for the vets to be able to share a story and talk about and sort of say, yeah, that happens, or this, yeah, that's part of how this works.
Yeah.
And I think that was, I honestly entertained the phone call originally because my friend said, hey, this woman Michelle is going to call you. Just pick up her phone. Pick up. Oh, all right. I guess I will.
See what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just turn back. Anything you want to amplify about the process, which actually is just absolutely central to how this all came together, of talking to these veterans. Michelle, you want to add anything before I turn to Seema's part of this journey?
Well, I think, one thing something that really struck me was that, like Nate said, I couldn't believe that nobody had asked people about their stories. That was so stunning to me. And I would say almost every single person that I talked to thanked me for listening to their story. I felt very grateful that they were actually telling it to me, but they were actually just so moved that somebody actually wanted to hear their story. And I live in LA. I mean, everyone's telling their stories all the time. Everyone loves telling their stories. So I couldn't imagine.
Town full of stories, yeah.
Yeah, it's a town full of stories. So I couldn't imagine that everybody wasn't wanting to tell their stories all the time. And it turns out a lot of people did want to tell their stories. And I had to go in always saying, if you change your mind, that's fine. If you say anything that you want to take back, that's fine. There's nothing here. I'm not trying to get anybody. I'm not trying to make something happen. I have zero agenda except to just hear you. Mm-hmm. And that opened up a lot of doors, and I got a lot back from that. I got a lot back. And I talked to Nate, and I asked Nate who I should talk to, and I talked to Steve, and another Steve, and he told me someone else to talk to, and it really just it was very easy. There's a few people that turned me down. There was a few people that flaked out, but all in all, I had a lot of conversations.
So over the couple of years since Michelle started that hard work, the Atlantic Council has continued to support and develop and promote the play through a staged reading, through a workshop production last fall. And off of those experiences, which were well received, it was our ambition this year to stage a big stage reading at a big theater, either in Washington or somewhere else, and really give a big tailwind to this great work and to its further development. And then there came the pandemic. So all of you would either know or can certainly imagine readily, if you didn't know it, that live theater is shut down across this country and pretty much across the world, with just a few exceptions. And so consequently, this ambition that was pretty well developed in late spring suddenly came to naught, or looked like it might came to naught. And then I was browsing around the theater offerings here in Washington, D.C., and I came across a short film produced at the Arena Stage Theater called, is it May 20th or May 22nd?
May 22, 2020.
May 22nd, 2020, which was a time capsule. You can say what you want, or you can characterize it as you would. For me, it was a time capsule of the pandemic in Washington. And I was intrigued by the fact that a theater company had done this, and I thought it was really well done. And so I sought out and ultimately was put in touch with Seema. Although not that long ago, for the high quality of what you all just saw on the screen, I hope and expect you'll be surprised to know that I think our first conversation was not until the first week of August.
That's accurate. I was just remembering that. And of course, it also feels like a lifetime ago.
Indeed, right.
But first of all, Stephen, I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity to work on this project, and to thank everybody at the Atlantic Council. It's been a real honor for us at Arena Stage to partner in this way with this very great think tank, the Atlantic Council.
Thank you.
And to dive into these stories. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Mm-hmm. So from there, right, some guy at a think tank calls you and says, hey, I got a play I'd like made into a movie.
Well, Yes, well, first we should also let the public know that, Stephen, you have a theater background as well, which is why you shared this joint love of theater
I
and
do.
policy.
Right.
And as you and I spoke on the phone, we discovered that we both shared these two loves. I have a master's degree in international relations with a
Mhm.
focus on Middle East politics. But I think I may have shared with you that the very first professional play I
You
ever
did.
did was A Piece of My Heart by Shirley Laurel, which
Right.
was about the women who served in the Vietnam War, also drawn from interviews. And it made such a profound impact on my life as an artist, because the little theater where I did it, which was outside of Chicago called Circle
Mhm.
Theater, that director connected with the veteran community there. And there was
Mm.
one particular veteran I remember. He was called Short Round. And Short Round and his family every Saturday would make hundreds of sandwiches. And
Mm.
then they would go to all the alleys, underneath every bridge, all the back streets throughout Chicago, and feed homeless veterans with
Mm.
these sandwiches. I
Yeah.
was so moved. And he came and saw that play about 10, 12 times. And every time he brought more vets. And that brought to me the power of this connection between artists and veteran communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Indeed, almost a decade later, when I was in San Diego running a theater company, I produced that play again and
Mhm.
had a chance to connect with Veterans Village of San Diego,
But little did I
the
know how
Veterans Museum.
susceptible
Yes,
you would be to this when I brought it to you,
that's
and
right.
yet, like you say, within the first 20 minutes of our conversation, there was a lot of consonance between our impulse for the sort of work that art can serve.
Exactly. But then, of course, the question was, how the heck are we going to do this in the middle of a pandemic? And
Except that I'd seen you do it, so I
yes,
knew that you had a key to something.
right. You had seen the films we were making at Arena
Right.
Stage, but that was all filmed in person and outdoors
Yeah.
around the Washington, D.C. area. And along with that, as the union SAG-AFTRA was getting more and more
The
savvy
Actors
to
Union, the Screen
yes,
Actors Guild.
to artists working in these conditions, the precautions and the safety needs, uh, COVID tests that everybody needs to take,
Right.
became interesting obstacles that we wondered whether we wanted to navigate. But at the same time, I was reconnecting with a theater artist I've worked with before, Jared Mizzachi. He's a projection designer
Mhm.
in live theater. And he had created a team called VidCo, Virtual Design Collective. And
Yep.
they had discovered a way to use projection software called Isadora, pipe it through Zoom to be able to create live events and filmed projects that break down these Zoom boxes and allow
Mhm.
you to edit, cue in different effects. And once I saw that, I thought, oh,
The cool
this
stuff
is the
we've
way.
seen in the movie, the cool
There
stuff
we
we've
go.
seen in the film. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I thought this might be the way. And so I reached back out to you and said, would you be open to this approach? And and the other thing that undercurrent was this idea of it's Veterans Day 2020.
Mhm.
2020 is a unique year. And rather than trying to run away from it or hide that we're
Yep.
in a pandemic, to embrace it and embrace that we are communicating, trying to connect with people through these screens.
Yep.
And what would it mean to actually make that a hallmark of how this particular story is told in this particular year, in this particular moment? So I thank you and the Atlantic Council for being willing to go down this road. And Michelle, speaking with you about it, I know at first everybody was like, "Oh, a Zoom play? That sounds awful." But I appreciate that you took that leap of faith to go with us on this. Thank you.
Well, it was a little bit of a leap, but it didn't seem all that hard because of your conviction. You had a conviction that this would be great, that this could be great. And I talked with you enough to take confidence from your conviction. In general, what working with artists I do, that's what I'm always looking for. If they've got conviction about something, nothing will stand in their way in my experience with them. Well, let me turn the page a little bit and actually pick up right from where you were, Seema. I think one of the great satisfactions of the film for me, I hope for others in the audience, is the fact that this was both. It's obvious in one respect that it was produced with Zoom, but but it, like you say, it went so far beyond the boundaries of what those of us who day to day in business experience Zoom to be. And I actually think in this moment there was something kind of heartening about that. That it was a demonstration of another of the impositions of this damned pandemic that we fought back against, that we transformed into a work of art. I wonder if you pick up the second chapter of our conversation by talking about that, talking about the artistic choices you made. You've already indicated one of them. Let's embrace, if that's the right term, the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic rather than walking away from it. Could you say more about that?
Well, I hearken back to what Adrienne Arsht said in her opening remarks about resilience.
Mm-hmm.
A crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and this was an opportunity for the art form to grow, to expand, and an opportunity for me as an artist to direct for the first time in this particular platform, and that was truly exciting. But with any project, the first question we always ask as directors is, why is this play necessary now?
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the now we're living in, and certainly the now of just a few weeks ago when we started speaking, or a few months ago, we live in such a polarized nation where we're in our silos, we're in our corners, and we don't know one another. We've othered and not humanized each other. And when you said to me, when I asked you, why did you commission this play in the first place?
Right.
And you said it was to humanize people who serve in the military, that really spoke to my heart. And I think that humanization goes both ways, that as an artist, I feel when I get to interact with veterans, that I also get to reveal myself and be humanized in the same way that they are humanizing themselves as they're telling us their stories. Yeah. So that became the action, the primary action to make the film was to humanize, in some ways to fight for humanity that each of these characters are doing in different ways. I say characters, but real life people who Michelle interviewed.
The humanity they deserve to be
Absolutely.
recognized.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, this allows me to thread back in my piece of this narrative, and that is to say, there's a line, or at least a reference in General Petraeus's remarks about this deficit, this civic deficit, and the need ultimately to create affinity among ordinary Americans. And maybe that's a tall order, but I think that's what's called for. Well, one of the effective, to my ears and eyes, great choices that you made in the script was to have everyone introduce themselves by how and why did you get in the military? That was brilliant. In what, the span, Nate, I see you nodding, right? In the span of 30 seconds and 6 interjections, we were off and running with each of those characters just off of that introduction, as a for example. Would you agree, Nate, that just asking why'd you join the military goes a long way toward understanding who the folks are in the military? Or is that too simplistic?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with something as simple as why'd you join, right? And then that, like one of the things that we talk about here is like just some curiosity towards a person's service. Because veterans are humans, right? They're people who have these complexities, and they join for a lot of reasons, and they serve for a lot of reasons, and they have a lot of different experiences. It's not just, polarizing, and it's more complicated than that. I think it's one of the things I really appreciate about the film, right, is that it demonstrates this sort of complexity, right? It's very hard to say a veteran is after the thing. You're like, after the film, you go, veterans a lot of things, right? There's a lot there.
Just like the rest of us. Yeah.
Right. I can't just put them all in a box. They all have very different experiences depending on what they did. And, and now it makes me kind of curious. I should ask the people I know who served about their experience.
Yeah. Allow me, Nate, actually to take you back to a moment. So last fall, I've alluded to the fact that we did a workshop production of the play on which the film is based. And Nate, you did us the favor of not just coming to see the play, but also staying afterward and doing what theater goers call a talkbacks. Came up on stage with me and had a conversation like this, but especially took questions from the audience. And one of the questions, and I'm going to put you on the spot again to answer, was, well, if I see a veteran or an active serving member in the airport, and I want to say something more interesting than thank you for your service, how do I engage them? You remember that question? And what was your answer?
I do, and I think the takeaway for that is an expression of curiosity, right? If you really want to know, just say, "Hey, where'd you serve?
Where'd
right?
you serve?
Who'd you serve with?" Just a little bit of a question mark can go a long way, and you'd be surprised, especially if you ask where somebody served or where they're serving. You know, they'll be like, "Oh, which place? Oh yeah, did you ever serve there? Do you know someone who served there?" Right? It's your identity, your unit, is
And your story, right? Because where'd you serve is the start of a story. And so you can elicit a story that way. I don't know, Michelle, if we can circle back to you, is that you probably didn't have that thought in your parlance where you serve, because as you've already admitted, you were working from an easier starting point, like.
Well, my starting point was, why did you serve? I mean, that was my question, because I really couldn't imagine any circumstances under which I would sign up to do that. And so, and what surprised me was that every single story was different. Every story was different.
And from both a journalist's point of view, you weren't a working journalist at the time, but certainly from a storyteller's point of view, they were great stories, right? You struggled. We've talked about the worst part of your job, which is the cutting that's necessary, right?
Yes. And sometimes, I mean, I think that's where my original idea about curating stories, where I got to really indulge in that, was to, you know, sometimes when you have 2 hours worth of material, there isn't like necessarily a cohesive story that's being told from top to bottom. But when when you go over it and over it, you start to make these connections, and you realize how many people speak in connections, even if they're not doing it deliberately. So, and it was through studying their stories and then studying stories in relation to each other that I could also start finding the connections between the stories.
Right. And then as we learned in the workshop, the placement and arrangement of them becomes very, very important to the way it comes off. Well, Nate, I'll give you the last word on this portion of our conversation. Does the play work? You're actually, say a word about what you do day to day. Actually, your character said it in the film, but you get to say it in your own words. If those weren't your own words, what do you do, and how does this film speak to that day to day work and journey that you're on?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting about this work, I have a little bit of an angel thing going on here.
That's right. That just adds to the whole effect.
I know. I'm a chaplain. So I am a chaplain in the.
Yeah, let's remind people you're the character Nate from the film, who is the Army chaplain.
That's right. So I the narrator, or the sort of who walks people through. And my role as a chaplain really functionally is to help people make sense of some of the mess that military life can bring on you. And so I sit with people all the time and try to help them put together pieces of their life, maybe take them apart. And so, you know, one of the things I really appreciate about this film and the play itself is that it leaves complexity where it is. And I think it's very difficult to do that, especially in a world where we like everything to be, you know, black and white, red, blue. It's very, right? But what I love about it is that it complicates things, because people's military service is complicated, and sometimes your best moment's next to your worst moment, and sometimes, I think Michelle tracked on those things really well, and a lot of the conversations that we had, it tells it honestly, right? People have really wonderful stories and really difficult stories, and their stories of homecoming are often mixed,
right?
Filled with heartache and filled with blessing, and you know, you meet your child, but you lose your job, right? It's like the best moments.
You survive Root Gold, but you get breast cancer.
Right. That's right. You know, these these challenges. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about this, is that it does humanize, to Seema's point. It does this deep work of humanizing and sort of making you see like, oh, there are people like me who wear the uniform, right? Who've taken on this burden, an additional burden to complicating their life in the name of.
You know, I agree. If I may just build on that, I do think, Michelle, one of the great achievements of the script is to leave complexity in the audience's lap, but at the same time create a satisfying experience, is I guess the only way I would put it. Right? That's some magic there that you've accomplished, and in turn rendered very, very beautifully, Seema. But that's a special thing that I think Nate's got his finger on. Right? These are not you didn't nothing terribly tidy about it, but in its whole, it's real, and it speaks to, and this is what I want to turn to. It speaks to it speaks to some civic work. I mean, that's my word. Those are my words now. And why don't we stick with Nate while we open up this last chapter of our conversation? What is that work, Nate? Just say a little bit more about the particular challenges, and you face a bunch of them, but especially in the relationship between what I will continue to call ordinary Americans, ordinary good-hearted Americans, and soldiers, sailors, veterans, warriors, as I would prefer to call them. What's that work that needs to be done?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of work to do. So I think, for one, the context that soldiers live is one of, even the fact how we're doing this, right? I think, to Seema's point, we are separated, right? We are a very, very divided country, and that is felt with warriors, right? It's very difficult to come home to a community that barely exists. So what we find is that warriors are experiencing that disconnect more and more. Right? People get out of the military to a community that's already fragmented, that's already divided by lines and lines and lines of identity and partisanship, whatever it is, right? And so I think the work is this sort of bridge building, is to find a way to build a bridge so that vets don't get lost on the way home. We were talking earlier. This is one of the oldest things that have plagued warriors. The stories of like some of the ancient Greek stories of Ajax or Agamemnon, their failed homecomings, right?
Yep.
Stories of warriors who couldn't make it all the way home. Even the story of Philoctetes is the story of a warrior whose wounds stunk, and so he got stranded on the island of Lemnos. These are stories that speak to the difficulty of making it home. And I think one of the things that we have to do now is find a way to help make those bridges. And I think what I see in this film is this journey that a bridge has two sides, right? Yeah, two people who are translating and make a place where people can cross over and understand the other's perspective, maybe connect with them and their experience. And so that's what I see here, and I think we have to figure out more creative ways to do that.
And that is meaningful. That is resonant with the work you see that needs to be done. Again, among us and for veterans.
Yeah, and I my role as a chaplain is I sit with a lot of young soldiers who are struggling.
Right.
They ask me, I don't know how to live. They say, like, I'm wandering. I mean, they, in less words, they say, I since I've gotten out, I'm not sure how to live anymore. Literally, there's an epidemic of suicide, but really it's a crisis of life. It's a crisis that warriors don't know how to live in this world. And I think one of the things that I think we're trying to do, or that I see in this film, is that this, like, try to find a way to allow warriors to live, to build a bridge so they can come home and find meaningful ways to engage and live in the world again.
Yeah. We shouldn't, we don't have time to talk about it here, but the crisis of suicide in the military is actually getting worse at the moment. Michelle, what's the further work and ambition you have for your play, War Words?
So my ultimate dream, my ultimate goal with this piece is for it to and I love what Seema did with this film, and I'm so thrilled that it's been able to live. But beyond that too, I would love to see it, obviously live in the theater again,
Mhm.
um, uh, and sort of following the paradigm of what Eve Ensler did with the vagina monologues, and there she created something called V-Day. So every Valentine's Day, the play can be licensed for free from at any theater, and then all the proceeds from those productions go to organizations to support women in crisis. And my ultimate goal for this piece would be to be able to license it every Veterans Day, and for all those proceeds to be able to go to some kind of veterans organization to be agreed on. Maybe it's this, maybe it's about how helping vets transition into real life. They get trained to go into the military, but they don't necessarily get trained to come back in to day-to-day life here.
Right.
So that to me would be the ultimate goal of this piece. And because personally it's been so painful to me to have to cull these pieces and not tell the entire stories, I think I would eventually like to see some kind of supplementary platform, like maybe it's online, where the full stories can live, and where maybe other veterans can tell their stories, and they can at least live somewhere and people can see them and hear them, and we can notice their purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the
Well,
big fantasies.
tell you, you and I have conspired about this before, and Barry Pavel has authorized me, if you will, to assure you and assure the audience the Atlantic Council is going to stick with this. The Atlantic Council is going to promote that tradition next year. But the more important thing for the audience to know is we're not trying to own that tradition.
Mhm.
What we want is for that tradition to propagate and live in all sorts of places that we don't even know about or necessarily motivate. If you need some help picking up that tradition next Veterans Day and doing a stage greeting or more of the play War Words, let us know. But don't wait for us. If you are turned on by what we've done here and the larger civic purpose of it, put it on your calendar and do it. And Michelle commits to us that she'll give you a license to perform it for free.
Can I add something to that, Stephen? I just want
Add
to.
something to that, and then pick up, please. I wanted to draw you out on a larger thesis that again, unawares, that you were working toward, is something that I hope Arena Stage and the Atlantic Council will continue to cultivate next year. But start with the point you wanted to make, please.
I wanted to emphasize for folks who just watched the film that you just saw, a 37-minute excerpt of the full play, and that there are other characters, other individuals in the full-length play that Michelle wrote. It was indeed painful to have to edit it down because there were so many wonderful stories. So I do encourage folks to pick this up, and every Veterans Day, do a staged reading of this, and take that opportunity to humanize yourself and humanize veterans and active duty military, and just build community intentionally and deliberately, as best as we all can.
I think it expresses in maybe a still more interesting way this idea that we at the Atlantic Council have of joining artistry to these serious issues of national security and other issues about public policy more generally. So talk to us about that, how this work fit into that. And then we will unfortunately have to draw our really great conversation to a close. Seema?
Absolutely. Well, consensus organizing for theater is an artistic methodology that I created. I adapted it from the traditional form of consensus organizing, which is a type of community organizing used in community redevelopment and social work.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is about mutual self-interest. So in this case, it's about a theater building a stake in various pockets of communities, and those communities building stake back in the theater by surfacing and organizing around mutual self-interest. As just an example here with this particular project,
Right.
Arena Stage every year throws a military Thanksgiving. This is when we invite military families to come to the theater. They get a free meal, and then they see whatever musical we happen to be playing at that time.
For those who don't know, Arena Stage is 4 blocks from Fort McNair in Southwest Washington.
That's right. That's right. And we also have a program with Blue Star Families that offers discounted tickets to Blue Star families throughout the year. Of course, none of this we can do right now during the pandemic. And so, Stephen, when you reached out, it was quite serendipitous because we were wondering how do we serve that interest we have to be able to connect with and serve the veteran and military communities. And this became a way to do it in 2020 in this very extraordinary moment that we're all living in.
Yeah. So there's lots of talk in business, in government, all around about partnership, about and it's almost lost content, this phrase. Well, this experience is a richly filled experience of partnership with great content to it, way beyond the words. It's been my tremendous pleasure getting to know you, Nate. Working with you, Michelle, working with you, and the Arena Stage, SEMA, and we will keep doing that in the year ahead, just in the ways that we have talked about here, and hopefully in some ways we haven't yet imagined. Hopefully we will get some responses from the audience who saw this, who have their own ideas for how to pick up the baton, take the impulse that this work and this conversation perhaps has generated in them, and themselves do something great to shorten that distance between veterans and ordinary Americans or any other ordinary person, so that progressively year over year we can have better and better Veterans Days. Thank you, the three of you. Thanks to all of you here in the audience. I hope this has made your Veterans Day special, as I assure you it has mine and the rest of us here at the Atlanta Council. Farewell. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.